early 1800s. Okay? Because the slave trade compromise, the Atlantic slave trade is going to be abolished in 1808. Okay? This is one of those weird times in history. And guys, this is how you think about it. Okay? When you study history, think about how things are ironic, how things don't work out as planned. When the founders agreed on the slave trade compromise, they figured slavery is a dying concern. We'll give these Southerners 20 years. We'll give you 20 years to continue to build your slave population. After 20 years, no more. Well, that's the 20-year mark. So in 1808, no more slaves. And nobody thought that Southerners had the money to buy more slaves because they weren't making money off of it. That's why the cotton gin's a big deal. The cotton gin made that pretty much an afterthought. Here's the problem with it. And guys, this is probably the greatest evil of slavery. It's an institution that has a lot of evils to it. But the greatest evil is this. When you cannot import slaves from Africa, and you need slaves for economy, that means you have to breed your own. And that's what happened because of this. That's when an additional industry is going to come up in the South, and that's going to be the slave breeding industry. Breeders will go out and they'll find the strongest male slave and the strongest female slave, and they will breed their children and sell them just like you would dogs or horses. It's incredibly distasteful to even talk about it, okay? But again, what is driving this? Guys, this is an assault on American morality, okay? So what is causing people to take their moral compass off the table and engage in this? Money. That's important. It's necessary for the economy. And guys, some of the wealthiest people in the South at the time of the Civil War were not plantation owners. They were slave traders. There was a lot of money to be made in it. It was so omnipresent, and it was so disturbing to people. If you remember, in the Compromise of 1850, congressmen sitting in their office in Washington, D.C. were offended by the fact that they could look out on the mall in Washington and see the slave markets. That's why I demanded that the slave trade, okay, would be abolished in Washington, not slavery. So just remember, one comment you can make in essays and one thing you can claim is look at how people will jeopardize their own sense of morality in the name of profit. And this is one good example right here. Okay? Is anybody get this so far? Okay. All right. Let's see. I'll just talk about that. Boom. Okay. This is important. Okay? The majority of white Southerners own no slaves. Guys, always remember the pyramid. Always remember that. When you get your AP exam, one thing you need to do is just draw the pyramid on there to remind you. Because that pyramid tells you a lot, okay? First of all, the majority of Southerners are yeomen, poor yeomen at that. They can't afford slaves, and if they could afford them, they're not going to use them because they don't own plantations. So this makes perfectly common sense because of the demographic. About 3% of Southerners own slaves. Only about 3%. Of that number, only about 1.8% own more than 100. So this concept of these plantations with thousands of slaves, it was very, very restricted. It wasn't the status quo. It was what was normal, okay? That's an important thing. I've seen that question on the test before too, okay? Okay, here's the question. Guys, one of the questions that may pop up sooner or later, and it's going to, okay, because it's so volatile, okay? It's going to be a question about what caused the Civil War, things of that nature, okay? And you have to practice making arguments. If you want to make the argument that the Civil War was not fought over slavery, you can use that. Because the majority of Southerners had no stake in slavery. Win or lose, slavery gone or slavery there, it doesn't affect these people at all, okay? So if you ever make the argument that the South was not fought for slavery, but instead was fought for state rights, that's one thing you can use, okay? It will help back that up, okay? Okay. In 1831, the scariest, most tragic slave rebellion in American history is going to occur. There had been several. The Stonewall Rebellion was a slave revolution. Denmark Vesey like this. But Nat Turner's rebellion is the one that's going to really scare people. Nat Turner starts bringing nightmares about Haiti. Okay? Let's see. Did you guys, there was a movie that came out last year about Nat Turner's rebellion. I can't think of the name of it. Birth of a Nation. And not the one that Woodrow Wilson showed in the White House. It was a new one. It was about the Nat Turner Rebellion. Okay? Nat Turner was a slave in Suffolk County, Virginia. And according to Nat Turner, God came to him in a vision. And he said, "You are my Moses." And the reason what he's saying is that you're going to take your people out of bondage. Okay? So in other words, Nat Turner feels like he's on a mission from God. And if he dies in God's service, he becomes a martyr. Okay? And that's the most dangerous kind of leader you can have. When somebody's leading a rebellion or something and they want to die, it's hard to scare them. Okay? So what he's going to do is he's going to go around at nighttime and start freeing slaves throughout the plantations. They're going to get weapons and things like this, and they're going to go on a killing rampage. Okay? It will be put down. The people that participate in the rebellion will be arrested and executed, including Nat Turner. Okay? But this is what's important about it. Think about this for a second. Anytime you talk about the institution of slavery, and thank God we don't have any type of basis to recover that from, put yourself in the mind of a slave. Look at what your life is. Sun up to sundown is work. That's it. It's all work. You may get Saturdays and Sundays off. You might get Sundays off to do something other than work. But that is your entire life. Okay? You are owned from the minute you get there until the day you die. Your kids are property and their kids are property. So if you look at it, when you look at what people live for, we all live for something better in our future. These people had no future. They had nothing better. So when it came to a situation like Nat Turner, he saw no reason why he shouldn't lead a rebellion and why he shouldn't die. Okay, for one thing, death frees them from this slavery. And that's important to remember because, guys, no slave was practically satisfied with being a slave. The slaves that came back later and said, we missed the old South, the plantations, they were measuring that against the Jim Crow of the Reconstruction era. Okay? Nobody doesn't want to be free. Okay? So Nat Turner became a figure. When people in the South were thinking about, well, maybe we should slack off on the slave laws and things, people did sue things, okay? Remember Nat Turner? Remember Haiti. Okay? Because, guys, always remember this. A plantation owner's worst nightmare is a slave with a gun or a slave with a weapon. If a slave gets a weapon, he might as well die. He's living a life of hell anyway. If he's got a weapon, he's going to take somebody with it. And that's why these slave codes were so strict. If you ran, after Nat Turner, if you ran away and they caught you, they'd cut your feet off. Okay? Now, what good's a slave without feet? Well, that slave can sit back and turn that cotton gin handle. Okay? So what they would do is they would have public punishments like this. All these slaves that got bruised